The department's been around for a long, long time. But for the biggest part of that time, from the late 1800s through maybe the 50s, it was primarily a law enforcement agency, hatchery agency, and focused on law enforcement in hatcheries and enforcing the rules that the legislature and the laws that the legislature created. And since the 50s, it's just been a gradual evolution of becoming more and more comprehensive, more and more intensive in its research and studies involving the fisheries and the wildlife of the state. And today, the department looks nothing like it looked when I came. When I came, it was the fisheries and the wildlife management side was a very simple part of the operation. Had very few personnel. We had 6 or 7 fisheries regions and 6 or 7 wildlife regions. That was the principal focus. The fisheries people were focusing on the waters, doing aquatic inventories, lakes and streams, and the wildlife people were focused on managing the department's lands. And it's just gradually, as the authorities from the legislature were transferred to the department, as its responsibilities became more, the need for more information, for better science, for more people to carry that out has just continually changed. And so today's department is much more comprehensive, much more intensive than what it was when I first came.
I want to take this opportunity to thank former Deputy Commissioner Fred Hurley for his insights into the past operations of inland fisheries and wildlife. Since 1880, our department has protected, preserved, and enhanced the fish and wildlife resources of the state of Maine. We want to salute our former employees and our present employees for their service to the department. Enjoy these anecdotal references to the past, and thank you very much for your support.
Really, as a game warden, I didn't find it necessary to fly in bad weather because you couldn't see anything anyway.
We raised Atlantic salmon, landlocked salmon, togue, and brook trout.
We were skin diving in Sebago, and as I swam along, I dove down to maybe 25 feet or so, and I said to myself, there's a bomb. I went back to the surface, got another lung full of air.
And I even asked a legislator, when are we ever going to clean up these waters? These waters will make excellent fish habitat. They need to be cleaned up, and when are we going to do this?
The department is lucky that over the years it has people that are more interested in managing the fish and wildlife, encouraging the use of the resources than they are their paycheck.
Our wildlife division, our fisheries division, and our hatchery division comprise our Bureau of Resource Management. And they are responsible for some of the nation's most important natural resources. The largest lake and pond population of wild brook trout in America. And in the lower 48, we have the largest population of black bear. Our scientists are in the 21st century with radio collaring, GPS, and telemetry. This will give you a glimpse into yesteryear. Enjoy.
I was a regional biologist. There were some older wardens that didn't have much use for biologists. And, you did it the old way and all this and that. And I got a call on a sick moose over in Norwich Walk, I guess it was. And I'd go over and handle the situation. So it was one of the old wardens there. And I swear he figured I was going to come with a white coat and a stethoscope and try to cure the moose. And of course I got out with my .35 Remington rifle. And he says, "You got the right medicine for him." I got a kick out of that.
I mean, when we did the Sebago Lake thing, the DDT in Sebago Lake was a good example of that. I told, what was that guy's name? The reporter for WCSH. When they wanted to come out to Fish and Game Office in Gorham and do an interview on the fact that we'd found 700 or 800 parts per million in some of these salmon, and so Chuck Sanford it was. So I said, when Chuck he's getting stuff set up, and I said, Chuck, I said, you remember, don't ask me if these fish are edible, because I'm not qualified to answer that question, and I'm not going to. And I'll talk about other stuff. So we did the interview. Stu was sitting in the background. I'm doing the interview. And at the end of the interview, Chuck looked me right in the eye and said, would you eat this fish? It was the perfect question. And I had to say no. What else was I going to say? So when I said no, the camera zeroed in on my face, saying no. And then the next thing I realized that maybe I had a little problem was when it was on national news, and the governor who is the governor? Jeez. Curtis must have been the governor. Curtis was in Arizona, and the commissioner, Cobb, was in Acapulco. And the next thing, my phone rings at home, and it's Commissioner Cobb saying, Anderson, what the hell do you think you're doing? I said, Roland, what do you mean? He said, I just got a call from Ken Curtis, who's in Albuquerque, and he said you were on national television saying you would need to fish from Sebago Lake. Is that true? And I said, yes, it's true. It is true. I said it, and it's true. And I don't think anybody would argue with that. And he said, you know, I'm in Acapulco, but I want to see you in my office tomorrow. So I said, okay, I will. I'll see you there. I figured I didn't say anything that was lying. And I had all the numbers. So I went up to see him. And John Marsh rode up with me, I remember that. I left John in the car. And he wasn't too upset because he realized that it was a big problem. And some doctor had come on that day and said that he wouldn't need him either, which helped me out. And but they never sprayed another drop of DDT in Sebago Lake again, ever, after that day. Never, not one drop. But it was quite a little hassle. It was quite a little hassle.
Smelting on Long Lake was, whoa, I could go on a long time with that. That was one of those things that the regulation used to change every other year, it seems like, and not much you could do about it. People would petition, and it would get to a public hearing, and we used to have our public hearings in the Sinclair Fire Station, I think out behind the fire trucks. That was the only place we could meet. But I remember we finally shut down the brooks, and because the population came back tremendously, and Long Lake, as it's turned out, become one of the most spectacular lakes for big salmon in the state. But of course, once again, after being shut down for 20-some-odd years, one of the streams got opened up again a few years ago, and after 2 or 3 years by the legislature, mind you, and 2 or 3 years after that, it kind of went south as far as salmon growth goes. So I guess it's now closed again, which was a fortunate thing. But I recall us changing the season, because that was one of the places in Aroostook County where they were able to fish with 3 hooks per line, hook and line through a smelt shack in the wintertime, and you could do it in December, or as soon as the ice formed. So they used to like to get out there in December, and we changed that to become more compatible with the game fishing season. The Warden Service was concerned about illegal harvest of large salmon in the early smelt season when it wasn't legal to keep them, and so we changed it to be later, to coincide with the January opening, I think is what it was. And we had a great letter to the editors, and it was headlined, "No Smelts for Christmas. Biologists closed down smelting until January 1. It just, we've never forgotten that, and we use that quote quite often, as a matter of fact.
During the spruce budworm spray years, we were checking the effects on non-target organisms, and partly because of my interest in birds, I was working some with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We were trying to determine if there might be sublethal or delayed effects. And so we were collecting birds pre and post spray, canopy-dwelling insectivores, mostly warblers, but also other things. And what we would do is collect them, dissect out the brains, plunge the brains in liquid nitrogen, so that before and after levels of acetylcholinesterase could be determined, that being a biochemical mediator of nerve impulses. And that was the monitoring protocol that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came up with. And it was pretty interesting. By and large, very little by way of effects. Of course, mortalities disappeared quickly in the forest, but still, we had a lot of people out looking. And we had a lot of dead birds reported, but once you got a hold of them and looked at them, they were mostly logging truck mortalities. Those were at the height of the spruce budworm years. There were tremendous populations of evening grosbeaks, and you'd come around a corner and there'd be 200 grosbeaks in the road. The guys driving those big log trucks, they couldn't miss them all. Yeah.
Well, something kind of interesting, I thought. I was out with one of the wardens. Like I said, we worked together. That's how you got to know them. I got to know them real well. Nice guys, most of them. And they really were. And I was out with this Charlie Toby. You might have known him. And we were surveying a deer yard. And I said to him, you know, this snow's awful deep. You know, you can run a deer down in this kind of snow. And he said, no. I said, watch. So I got the deer out of the trail into the snow and ran him down. Went in front of him to, you know, just stop him. And he reared up and tried to hit me with his hoofs. And Charlie had to jump on his back and to save my neck, because I fell down. I tried to back up with snowshoes with tails, and you don't do that. That was a surprise. But he told me an interesting fact that I thought was, you know, a little off base. He said, you know, I be careful how far I go with the snowshoe. And he said, I get snowshoe sickness. And I figured, oh yeah, that's another. So what is it? And he said, well, you can't lift your legs. One of your muscles gives out, you don't know it, and you can't lift your legs. And I said, well, all right. Well, I was out one day. Ken Anderson, who was a wildlife biologist south of me, we were friends. We'd known one another for years, and went together into this deer yard area. And we were coming out after we got done. We weren't very far from the road where the car was, and he called to me and he said, I can't move. I said, what do you mean? He says, I can't lift my legs. And he couldn't. He had to stand there a while, and then he could go a little ways, and then, and your muscle, that muscle gives out without you knowing it. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't feel tired or anything. It just stops, and certain people. So we got out with him going a little ways and stopping, and here I was taking some physical therapy. One of the women was talking to her about various things, and I said, "Would you ever hear of snowshoe sickness?" And I described it to her, and she said, "No." But she said, "I'll look it up." Sure enough, next time I saw her, she said, it really is. It really happens.
Well, in my early career, the logging industry and fisheries, in a lot of instances, wouldn't really see eye to eye on certain things. And so it took a while, I think, to teach them some of the poorer practice that were occurring that were impacting fisheries. And one of the big things that came about when Land Use Regulation Commission came on the scene in the late 60s, early 70s, were to try to, because the log drives had stopped in 76, there were hundreds and hundreds of miles of roads that were created. And with that, they really didn't have the background on how to best protect streams. And so there were a lot of siltation events. And I guess I was once told that of the number of siltation events reported to the Land Use Regulation Commission, thanks to our wooden pilots, were 70% of them were up in the northernmost region out of Ashland. And so we worked hand in hand with those foresters to talk to them about building diversion ditches and making sure they didn't have long runs of road ditches for, a quarter of a mile going directly into a stream, and how they could get rid of that silt before it ever got to the stream. And it was really, really kind of an important thing, and it was important for them because they were subject to court cases or fines or whatever. And so they began to really work with their foresters, and their foresters began to work with their jobbers, and everybody came on board. And the forest industry just really, really did a great job cleaning up their act in terms of siltation in those streams. Because early on with the drive-in, they felt like they had to straighten out every little nook and cranny in that stream, and all those little places that dug the pools and the boulders and logs that dug the pools that harbored the adult fish, they would just straighten out. And that was so the wood wouldn't go back into the back channels and so on when they drove those streams. And so there were thousands of miles of stream that were bulldozed over the course of the pulp driving era. And a few of those have been restored. I had the opportunity to work with Scott Paper and Roger O'Clair in restoring a piece of Tom Hegan Stream up on Moosehead Lake. And we worked with just a single individual from Scott with a backhoe-type machine. It was a rubber-tired machine that he could get into the stream with and work. And we essentially, the stream was just this narrow thread of water over, because it had been widened out so much by driving, just a straight shot of water, and just really exposed to sunlight, and just had basically, it was no longer a trout stream because of the way it had been treated. And so we actually narrowed that stream up maybe half to a third of the width by rebuilding the banks, putting boulders in, pieces of log to start to dig pools, actually digging some pools and maybe putting something in that would maintain the pool for adult fish, and then actually going to the former bulldoze stream bank and taking the backhoe and lifting whole clumps of alders up and moving those onto the new stream bank so that it could be vegetated fairly quickly and create shade again. And it was a pretty impressive project. It was a a lot of fun to do. The guy was a great operator of equipment, and they were happy to be doing it. And so there was a little bit of that took place. I think Roger and Ken Warner worked on Souderhunk Stream up in Baxter that had been bulldozed, and they restored a piece of Baxter. And Ken Warner did some things on some of the other streams up in Aroostook. But there were a little bit. The more we began to realize and do stream studies, which before we pretty much just did estimates of populations, but when we began to do habitat studies, we really realized how many of those streams had been really disturbed by log driving.
It was, in those days, it was the people were trying to get all these regions organized. It was sort of the beginning. Harry Everhart had started the beginning of the Fisheries Division, and it was, there wasn't any data. It was amazing that we had been stocking fish for 100 years and fooling around with a few lakes in Maine, like Rangeley and Sebago, but we hadn't really done anything to figure out what the other lakes were and what fish were in them. And so it was, in the beginning, getting these regions set up, Harry getting these regions set up and getting people talking to each other. It was like 90% surveying. I remember driving around with DeRoche, stopping at brooks and taking the water temperature and the flow and writing down what brook was what. And then no lakes in southern Maine had been surveyed. So there were no sounding maps, no lists of fish in lakes. So there was all the regions, once they all got organized, were doing inventorying stuff in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, we were doing a duck survey with Ray Porter, was the one I was trying to think of. We flew up to the river on the St. John, and we used to fly down by Dickey in that area, counting black ducks. And Ray and I went up there one morning. He picked me up in Squapan Lake over here. But when we get up there, the river was all fogged in. We couldn't see no ducks. I couldn't even see the river. So we decided to just fly somewhere until the fog lifted, which we did. We flew around there about an hour or so. After a while, the fog disappeared, and we went and done our duck survey. And coming back, we got right. I looked down, I could see Route 11, the road, and I look over, and I could see Squapan Lake, and all of a sudden, the airplane took to shaking. And it was in a convulsion, about like my pickup is running now. And the prop stopped. It was just as quiet as could be. And Ray says, "Be calm," he said, we can glide in, we can glide in. And I could see the lake out there, but all this time he's flipping switches and pulling this gear and doing that. And he finally started the engine. We weren't very far from the lake, but we were over woods. And what happened, when we went up there, we got flying around an hour more than we thought we were going to be, and he forgot to switch the tanks on the airplane coming back, talking and wasn't noticing it, you know. But anyway, we flew in there, we run out of gas. Normally they switch before you run out, you know. But that thing just stopped right in the air, and that prop, I'll never forget it. That was going around, and then all of a sudden, just there's the prop right there, right in front of you, not turning. It was very quiet, like I said. It was just like we were floating in a big cloud. But I could tell we were going down, you know. And I don't know why the plane didn't go straight down, but it was just gliding, like he said, gliding along. And kind of scary, you know. I know I was pretty weak in the legs when I got out. Didn't bother me too much then, but and one other little time I was flying with Jack, I want to mention. We landed on Mooselet Lake. This is in the winter time, looking for deer yards and whatnot. We landed there, take a little break, and we get out of the plane, and all of a sudden we could hear little coyote puppies barking. This was like in April, but there was still ice and everything on the lake and snow in the woods. There was a litter of coyotes right there, just beyond where we was. So Jack said, let's go see them. So we started running across the ice. Right where the snow blowed over into the woods, it was all grass. There was no ice there. And we were running, we hit that snow, and we both went through the ice, right up to about here. There's not a lot of water, but a lot of just mucky stuff, you know. And we went right down, got real wet, and we frantically turned around. We tried to scramble to get back up onto that ice, which we made it. We were black and mud and wet and cold, but then we got in that airplane. I'll tell you, we weren't long coming back to Garfield. We had a landing strip right in front of my house. But it was worth mentioning in one of my stories. A lot of fun with poor old Jack, but that sure took us by surprise, I'll tell you. Them little coyote puffs weren't 100 feet from where we were. But when we hit that snow, there was no ice. I suppose that blowed out there and kept that from freezing in that high grass. Grass was about that high. And it was an exciting experience.
When I first went down there, because they decided to cut it up into districts. And I had two supervisors that would be in my district down east, and they said, get acquainted with them. They said one of them was the biggest son of a bitch in the whole fish and game department. And I went down, and Ray Moss went down there. He ran the warden school up to Camp Keys. That's one reason they didn't like him, because he ran it like an army camp. He didn't go out at night and corrals or any of that stuff. And I went down there, and he came to the door. I'd never met the man. And I said, I'm the new biologist in this area. And I said, I wanted to meet you. I said, I've been getting condolences in Augusta because they said you're the biggest son of a bitch in the whole fish and game department. And big smile came on his face. Come on in, he said. He was tickled pink, and he and I became best of friends. We used to hunt together and do things together, and I was always invited to his meetings. It was quite a difference in supervisors. I've been to other warden meetings. They ran like a kindergarten, playing around and horsing around and playing cards and that kind of stuff. But Raymond's meetings were always business. I know this line tract intersect things. A lot of the wardens say, why are we going to do that? That's ridiculous. And Raymond says, we're going to do it. And that's it. He ran his divisions, I say, but he was a great guy.
Well, it was primarily warm water species that we worked with in the Belgrades. Even though we had what we call two-story fisheries, we had salmon, trout fisheries in Long Pond, Great Pond, and some of the other lakes in the Belgrades, such as the Meslonsky Lake. But there was primarily warm water bass fishery, a lot of bass anglers in the Belgrades, and a lot of guides in Belgrade lakes. There were guiding bass anglers in those days. Salmon fishing was good in Long Pond. Salmon fishing was good over in Parker Pond. But that all changed with time as well. I think the most invasive problem, Pete, was when people brought fish in. Then we'd see major changes that's occurred. Whether it's pike today, black crappies, or even largemouth bass, or any other fish species that's around. Those fish compete, and we know that. And we have these people that bring fish in, and they got a nickname. We gave them, they call them bucket biologists. And it still continues today, Pete. People don't understand, anglers, and I give all the credit for the world to good anglers, but most anglers want to have fish like from where they came from. And they bring these fish in by the bucket loads and they introduce them and try to make another fishery that they can experience like where they came from. But they don't realize that the competition that it creates, they don't realize what it does to life cycles of other fishes, and it's a real problem, and I don't think it'll probably ever go away.
It's hard for me to distinguish what I like best because I loved it all. I loved it all, I really did. And I told men that came to work, if they didn't like it, don't stay, because it's not for you. I think you need to like this job like I do. I loved it from the beginning to the end. I didn't want to leave, really, but I thought it was time to leave because I wanted to do other things.
One of the first things that had to be done was we had to determine the size and the depth and so forth of various lakes. Chesuncook Lake is the third largest lake in the state of Maine, and I sounded that lake with a recording fathometer with the help of a summer assistant, and it took us a week to do the job. I burned, I believe, around 50 gallons of gasoline just to sound the lake. Then we followed up with checking out all of the stream tributaries to the lake. We did water quality work on the lake. We took temperature series and measured the oxygen and pH content of the lake at different levels. We gill netted the lake and seined streams and beach areas to determine the fish populations that were present there. We also looked for obstructions on the stream to see if we could improve spawning, natural spawning for fish.
At any hatchery you go on, they'd love to see the engineering crew, and they seem to be able to put us to work anytime they wanted. And that was one thing, working for all of the divisions in the department. Everybody always had something for us to do, whether it be for the warden service on their camps, or the fisheries division always had either hatchery and headquarters always had the seven regional headquarters always had work that had to be done on them, and that might be working for any of the divisions. I can say that during my tenure as the head of the engineering department, I'm probably the only person in the department that has ever seen every structure that the Department of Fish and Wildlife owns. For the Wildlife Division, some of the work we did for them was up on Mooselook Lake up in the county. We rebuilt a dam in there one summer. At that same time, we rebuilt a dam down in Washington County on Orange Lake, and also a dam on Fayeye Pond over in Emden. We had all three dams going that year, and when we completed the dam at Fayeye that year, I walked into the department to tell Clayton that we had finished the work, and Steve Tippino came running up to me and says, "We have the permit for you to build the three dams. Now you can get started anytime." And I didn't have the heart to tell him we had just finished it, all three of them.
Thank you, Don, for those insights into the past and how the engineering division helped maintain our infrastructure. I think we have permits now most of the time. So thank you also to our Fisheries, Wildlife, and Hatcheries divisions for their input. And now we move to our law enforcement branch, the Maine Warden Service. And they have gone from on-the-street recruitment to being fully certified law enforcement officers at the Maine Criminal Justice Academy. Our men and women of the Maine Warden Service enforce our fish and wildlife laws, and they are some of the best in the country. Enjoy.
Dealing with lost people and drowning victims, things like that. You sometimes get involved with the people themselves, with the family, and you laugh with them and joke when things turn out good. When they don't turn out so good, sometimes you cry with them, you pray with them, and try to make things right, which you can't. But I was asked one time by one of the people that hold sessions after the search or recovery or whatever, and the only way I dealt with it, I guess, is I could go out in the woods and sit on a stump and think about it, and think how lucky I was that it wasn't me, or it wasn't one of my family, or one of my close friends. And that's the way I dealt with it. But other guys deal with it in different ways. I noticed one time we had a kid that about 5 years old that fell through a hole in the ice that a guy had cut to get bait, and we got him out. And I noticed Rick Stone, one of the wardens, he grabbed that kid and ran for the rescue unit, hoping to revive him, which it was too late. But he had kids the same age, and I think when you have kids the same age, it really bothers you a lot. I can think of several instances where my kids were about the same age as kids that we recovered, and it bothered me somewhat. I'm just glad that it wasn't one of mine. It's a terrible thing that they have to go through, but someone had to do it. That's basically the way. I was tickled to death when we found someone that was safe after they'd been out for 2 or 3 days. Tickled to death that we found them and they were still alive and going.
One of the fellows I didn't want to catch, but I was working with pigeon, Bill Pigeon. And so I told Bill, I said, we shouldn't do that. I said, if Curtis ever finds that out that we're using that, we're going to have hell. He said, we're going to put him up. Here comes one of the friends of Curtis, Brown, Yvonne Brown. And he gets out there and he shoots, and he goes to look at it, and he comes back to the car. So I told him, I said, look, we didn't want to catch anybody with this. So, boy, he said, that's the biggest bird I ever seen. That wasn't a bird, he said. Then a big friend of Curtis came, camp owner, June Dago, and he didn't ask us if he could shoot. He went right ahead and shot, and the bird disintegrated. But it was a good way to find out what people were thinking. Are they going to shoot illegally, and if they showed us, we were not going to catch them at that point, but we're going to follow them around on a dead-end road or something like that and find out that they were going to break the law.
Yeah, it was in the afternoon, I think around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I got the call that the B-52 was missing. And so Dave Priest and Dave was the supervisor there in the area, got in the airplane and flew over to KI, Katahdin Iron Works, was where a grader operator or somebody had seen the airplane go by, which on a low level. It was snowing and the wind was I don't know, it was an awful windy day, maybe 40 miles an hour, rough. And we flew the area up toward Elephant Mountain. But with all the blowing snow, we thought, well, there was nothing to see, so we didn't pick nothing up. I went home, and the next morning early, I got to thinking about it, and I thought, there had to be something. So I went back and flew up toward Elephant Mountain, and there was the wreckage of that B-52. And flying around, we saw a guy hanging in a parachute on the mountain just east of there, not moving or anything. And right around most of the wreck we circled, and there was which turned out to be, I think, the navigator on the ground waving to us. He had survived the crash, but he rode his seat down, and hitting the ground, it bent the seat so he couldn't get his survival gear out of it. So the fact that we didn't find him the day before contributed to his being out all night wrapped in a parachute and froze his feet. So Dowfield had sent up a bunch of people, a load of snowshoes, and they didn't know which way to put them on, whether they were front end or the back end. But anyway, they got a crew in there, and they picked the guy up. I met him years later. He came back a few times. Yeah, it always kind of bothered me that I hadn't gone far enough the first day to find him, thinking that maybe he wouldn't have ended up with frozen feet.
There was an old miser there in Blue River along the boundary, 10 miles from where I live in Canada. And his father owned the road and the operation. So I knew that they were getting their limit, and then he closed the gate and nobody else could come in. Even I couldn't come in. And then he wouldn't go back home with that. He dropped that into the lake, which was part of the boundary, and the boat would come in from across and pick up the partridge. They had been doing that quite a bit, so I thought if I get there early, so I started out early. It was the first day of the season, and I knew where there was a big flock of birds at an intersection. They were always there when I went. So I got there, and it was almost daylight, and it was daylight because I saw the bird on the way in on that road. But the birds were not there, and I said, holy, what am I going to do? I didn't come this far up, get up that early, so just do nothing. So at least I could have checked them for a loaded gun, maybe, but pretty soon I could hear the pickup coming, and I could see some blue, pickup was blue through the trees. So I said, if I could put something in the road that looks like a bird, maybe they might do something, and then I might get something out of it. I couldn't find anything, so there was like a spruce, no, the fir, spruce and fir, but the fir was better. The bark, when it gets dead, peels off, and then sometimes it's you could get a piece like that. So what I did, I started taking some pieces off until I had the chest and the bottom and the head and the beak, and they almost look good, but I can tell. I said, I'm going to take a check. So I tried to put a rock behind to keep it from falling down, and it would skip. So I put a piece of pulpwood, and it stayed there. So when they came there, the other man that was with the advisor there got out with his gun, and so when I heard him come and I couldn't run fast enough, I ran in a ditch almost in line with the shooting. So whenever he started shooting, the gravel would be flying over my head. But I didn't want to bother anything, so I couldn't have a chance to take it. So after a while, the other man come out and he shot, and they had a pile of empty shells in front of them. And he turned to the other fellow and says, "That damn thing is blessed," he said. So then I got up. After a while, they both tried to reload, and I got up and I said, "Don't shoot, that's just not a bird. I shot on it, and I had an empty shell." I showed it to him. He said, don't move, it's ready to fly." So then they went, and the other man I was with him was a priest. So I said, "Geez, I better not go to confession to that fellow. I'll never come out." And so after that, that started going around that I called Bill Vernon and John Robertson, and John says to Bill, "You going to shoot that bird?" Bill says, "No, that's not a partridge, that's just a spruce partridge." "I know it's bird's partridge when I see one. If you don't shoot it, I'll shoot it." So I was there, I knew they was coming over the knoll, and the bird was out there. So here so he, just as he took care of his gun better than he took care of his wife. So that gun had a hard time to come up from underneath the sheet. And then he aimed, and so I touched him. I said, "John, don't shoot that, that's not a bird." He ran after me for half a mile in the woods after that.
Somebody hunting for meat, I pinched the guy one Sunday. I caught him sawing up a deer in his woodshed. I went to give him a warning for trapping too close to a beaver house, and I could hear, sound like somebody with a high-pitched handsaw in this shed. And so I knocked on the door, and he came to the door, and he saw who it was, and I said, "Well, I want to talk to you about that beaver." Well, anyway, to speed up the story, he came out and turned around and locked the door, which is, that's not a good thing to do. I said, "What do you got in there you don't want me to see?" "Oh," he says, "I got some beaver." I said, "Well, that's why I'm here." So I gave him the warning, and he stood there reading it, and I said, "What's that? Looks like deer hair on their sleeve." And he panicked. He started brushing himself off. "Oh, that's the dog." But I knew I'd struck a nerve. So he eventually opened the door, and there was the deer hanging with a saw halfway down through it. And he slatted around. He said, "All right, you got me." So I took the deer. I took him, gave him a summons to court. He borrowed the $100, paid the fine. So I went up to tell my supervisor late in the afternoon how it went, and he didn't seem all that excited about it. He told me to give him back the deer. And I thought, well, when you knew, you had to tell the supervisor how everything went in case you fouled up, they knew how to handle you. So he told me to give the guy back the deer. And I said, well, I guess he probably paid for it, but that doesn't make it right. But I gave it back to him, and we were friends like nothing happened. He'd leave stuff from his garden at the house. He didn't hold it against me, but
I guess my weak point was when I smelled the beans in the lumber camp, and I had to go in there and be a night fellow to get a lunch. So I went in and sat at like a picnic table, and they were all sitting around sitting around the table eating their dinner, and the cook wasn't too far. the cook asked me, he said, how do you know if somebody's a poacher or not? Well, I said that most people that have dark eyes are good hunters, and people with blue eyes are not very good hunters. So next time I went into the camp, I couldn't understand what was happening. Everybody had their face in the plate.
Wardens first began having radios in their cars. And then we mounted radios in the airplane, but the early radios, well, Ray Harrington was a warden down there. And they brought a radio down to him, mounted in his car. Well, cars at that time, the heater in the car was a separate thing in the car. Anyway, they mounted a radio on his car, drilled a hole in that heater, and it leaked like bad. That didn't make him too happy, but then we got a lot of short skips on those radios. You might pick up Tucumcari in Texas or somewhere else and be able to talk to them, but you couldn't talk to the warden next door. But the radios got better. After a while, we could talk comfortably to about anybody in the state, especially with some relay stations that they had. So communications became real good.
I remember one guy, I didn't have much trouble interpreting his actions. He fired at a deer at night with a shotgun, and I took after him, and I caught him. He proceeded to beat me over the head with a flashlight. Now that's a pretty clear message. And I finally upended him, and he wound up, he spent a 5-month vacation in the Machias jail for assaulting an officer. And it was right beside the courthouse. Quite often after court, I'd go over and go in there, and I'd just kind of rub it in a little bit. But he knew he did wrong. He kept telling me he wasn't a bad fellow, and I said, well, that's good, I'm glad. But anyway, they didn't all do that. Most of them just, you caught them, they gave up, and the judge gave them, some of those judges had what amounted to a, I don't know what you call it, a revolving account. You know, they didn't, if they couldn't pay, well, pay what you can when you can. And as far as I know, some of them never paid if they couldn't. He told them if they could pay to pay, if they couldn't, forget it, I guess. But those, and they're all gone. Every one of those men that I worked with down there is gone.
Got ahead of him down here to Howland, and we were behind him, and he pulled him over. It was a ton truck from Connecticut and a Suburban from Connecticut, and there was 5 men involved. He stopped them fellas. They'd been hunting up in Newfoundland, and on their way back from Newfoundland, they see some deer up there inside the road, and they shot 2 deer and throwed it right in the middle of the moose that they had on the back of the dump truck. I jumped up on the dump truck, and there was them 2 deer still steaming. Of course, back then the fine was $200 night hunting. We arrested them, took them into Lincoln to bail them, and they kind of joked around and got into the jail and took pictures, and you know, they were having a good time. Anyway, when they come, we call the bail commissioner, and when they come to post bail, the old fellow was sitting there, and he wasn't saying too much. And when the bail commissioner come, he forked out $1,000 for their bail, and they went off on to Connecticut, and they wanted a copy of the newspaper.
Probably recall a great number of interesting cases. It'd be hard to put a priority on one or two, but I'm trying to come up with a good one. Back earlier in the program, I mentioned about chasing a man that had just fired at a deer. Well, before I caught him, I ran into a wire clothesline right under my nose, that'll slow your progress down somewhat. I lost my hat, my glasses, my clip-on necktie, but when I thought he threw something at me. I didn't see the clothesline, obviously, or I'd have ducked, but it was an old farmyard. No one lived there. So when I did catch him, of course, we get into a rattle, he pitched the shotgun, still had the flashlight about that long with a big. He started beating me over the head with it. I finally got him upended and held him down till the other one came. And I took him to jail, drove him to Calais, locked him up. And but anyway, when he went to court, he told the judge, and I can't remember the Calais or Machias at this point, but he told the judge the reason he did that is he thought I was a bear that had jumped out of an apple tree on him, top of him, and the judge he said, Mr. Lincoln, he said, I have a question. He said, how often would you expect, he said, that right after you had illegally fired at a deer in the dark with a shotgun, that a bear wearing a red coat and a hat and a badge would have jumped out of an apple tree on top of you? And he just shook his head. He didn't have anything to say. So that's when he got the 5 months. That's when he got the 5 months in jail in Machias.
What a great story, a warden disguised as a bear. So you've had an opportunity to glimpse into the past of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife through the anecdotal episodes as told by those who lived them. Our staff is extraordinarily professional. We have the best unit in the country. And as Commissioner, I am very proud to have been a small part of that. We thank you for your support over the years as we continue to preserve, protect, and enhance our fish and wildlife resources. Thank you for being with us.